Did you know that there were actual witches in England, or rather women who were killed for being witches? There's even the Witchcraft Act, which lists witchcraft as a punishable by death crime, a legal Parliament act. Here in Faversham, Kent, there's actually a plaque dedicated to some women who were killed in memory of Joan Wilford, Joan Cardigan, and Jane Holt, who were hanged here in this town on the 29th of September, 1645, after being branded witches. And it's plaques like this, where there's actual names associated with these crimes, with these murders, that really brings it home and makes it so much more real. Hi everyone, it's me. If you're new here, my name is Alanna, and I'm a Canadian, but I live here in the UK. And if you're not new here, hey, how's it going? Witches feels like a very Hollywood concept to me, but it started with real people, and that's what we're going to learn about today. So without further ado, let's go. When we talk about British witches, try saying that 5 times fast. British witches. I think one of the most famous cases, or one of the most famous trials, would be this, the Pendle Witch Trials. So this comes to us from History Hit. I thought we'd have a seat, learn something new. Maybe this is common knowledge for you. It certainly is not for me. Anyway, let's see what they have to say.
And it all started right here on the 21st of March, 1612.
1612. The plaque in Faversham was 1645 when the women were killed. So I wonder how long this sort of like witchcraft era actually lasted. Write that down.
On this very road between Trawden Forest and the market town of Colne, a local woman named Alison Devise was begging, as she so often did. A man, a peddler, John Law, passed her by. But something happened between them on this road, an incident, and it was this incident which set off a string of terrible events.
I'm intrigued.
To find out what happened, I'm meeting local historian and tour guide Simon Entwistle.
So Simon, you brought me here in the shadow of Pendle Hill. Why are we here then?
Well, this pathway would have looked exactly the same as it would have done in 1612, the Colne to Trawden Road,
That's
beneath
crazy.
the shadow of Pendle Hill.
These are fake names. Every time we watch a video that has anything to do with like British place names, they're all fake.
So Alison Devise and John Law met on this road. Can you tell me exactly what happened there?
She had a confrontation with John Law, the Halifax peddler. She begged some pins off him. He refused to take his pack off because he knew she had no money. She begged again, just a few pins, sir. All of a sudden, this huge black dog came from nowhere. The dog sat next to Alison, and the dog talked. "What wouldst thou want me to do to him? I can lame him." "Lame him," she screamed. Law felt this terrible pain on his left side and collapsed in agony on the pathway between Colne and Trawden.
I also really
Okay,
appreciate
so
that they're
it
wearing
appears that
sort of
John
like
Law had been
period
cursed,
pieces.
but what really happened, do you think?
It's very likely he had a stroke, but in those days it would be classed as witchcraft.
So what happened to John Law after this?
He was taken to an old alehouse. He was in a terrible state for a good 3 days. When his voice returned, he screamed out that he'd been cursed by this young girl in the forest of Pendle with a dog, and asked letters to be sent home to his family in Halifax, which they were. His eldest son, Abraham, made his way to Colne and saw his father in this twisted and contorted state. "Father, what's happened to you?" "I've been cursed, lad. Go into the woods, find this young girl called Alison Devise. She's cursed me. Find her, bring her here, reverse the curse." Abraham went into the forest of Pendle, found her, brought her back to the old alehouse, where she made eye contact with John Law. Law looked up from his sick bed. "It's you! You're the witch! You've cursed me!" She burst into tears and begged forgiveness. She had no idea she had just admitted to a state capital offence of witchcraft. And strangely enough, John Law, the Halifax peddler, was about to forgive her, but not his son Abraham. He went to see the local magistrate, Roger Noel, and in doing so, he opened what we now call the Pendle Witch Trials of 1612.
Fascinating. This is not really relevant, but kind of relevant. I wonder when we sort of understood what a stroke is. Like what year, what time frame would that have been? Obviously not then.
Alison Devise, along with her mother and brother, was summoned to appear before Roger Noel, where she once again confessed her crimes, apparently convinced of her own powers. When questioned about another local family who had also been tainted by accusations of witchcraft, Alison saw an opportunity to settle scores in a bitter neighbourly feud.
Oh, Alison, don't do that.
At the heart of this story are two families. They lived a short distance from each other and their paths must have crossed on a regular basis. They were remarkably similar, both only just putting bread on the table, making a living out of begging or doing odd jobs for better off neighbours. Both were headed by a matriarch, which was an unsettling concept for people.
Look at the typography. That's great. I was just going to say, I don't know if you're like me. I am very interested in true crime. I'm sorry, but it is shockingly common, scarily common, how often people falsely confess. And I think as like a person on the outside looking in, obviously this is quite an old case, but when you watch modern day cases where people falsely confess, you kind of think like, I would never. But I honestly don't think you could understand what it's like until you're really in that and you're in that very pressure, scary environment. Obviously, this is a little bit different than falsely confessing in a police station on a Netflix documentary, but it does happen, and that stuff freaks me out. Anyway, let's learn about these families.
In the 17th century. At the head of one family was Elizabeth Southerns, known as Old Demdike. By 1612, she was frail and blind. At the head of the second family was Anne Whittle, known as Old Chattox. Old Chattox, like Old Demdike, was a widow. She was probably in her 80s by 1612. Now, these two families had a long-held rivalry. Old Demdike and Old Chattox must have known each other all their lives, probably being girls together, married, raised families, and were now in old age. But it was a mutual distrust bordering on hatred, a rivalry
Girlies, let's come together.
was always there to add fuel to the fire.
Women support women.
With several members of both families now awaiting trial for witchcraft on the orders of Roger Noel, the authorities were on high alert. So, when a large gathering of people was organised at the home of the Demdikes on Good Friday 1612, an investigation began.
Many historians believe that this very area we are now in was indeed the home of the Devise family at Malkin Tower.
Convinced that the meeting had been called for sinister purposes, everyone who attended, no matter what their connection was to the family, was implicated. Noel ordered the arrest of a further 8 people on charges of witchcraft.
The accused were made to walk 40 miles from Pendle to Lancaster to be imprisoned here at Lancaster Castle, where they spent several months awaiting trial. The original courtroom no longer exists, although there was a new courtroom built on the same site later on, which is still in use to this day. The cell where they were held, however, has survived the ravages of time.
Wow. To show I love this stuff. Not the murder, the fact that this stuff was preserved. Like, as a Canadian, we just don't have this level of history. We don't have it. Like, it doesn't exist. But the fact that this exists, you can go visit it, you can see a real piece of history. It makes it so much more real.
Showing me around is the museum manager of Lancaster Castle, Dr. Colin Penny.
So Colin, this is it. This is the cell where you think that the Pendle witches were held.
Yep, tradition has it that they were kept down here.
Can you tell me a bit about what the conditions would have been like down here?
Oh,
Dreadful.
God, awful.
I mean, it's July now. It's cold down here, and they were imprisoned from April, when it would have been very wet, probably raining a lot. Water would have been running down the walls. There's no sanitation down here, and you were eating your food in absolute filth.
Has anyone been here before? I'd love to know what it's like. I've obviously not been, but maybe this is someplace we should put on the list.
Now, of course, they would have been down here, those two rival families together. Do you think that was a tense time?
Very. Yeah, I mean, they didn't get on when they weren't in the same room. I mean, you can imagine that when they were thrown together down here, each having accused the other one, they were going to have a fair few ding-dong arguments, but they probably didn't last that long because the conditions would have taken their toll. They would have probably become quite poorly, and we know old Demdike died.
Can you just tell me a bit more about what happened there?
Well, she was in her 80s, the conditions, they were awful, and prison populations were decimated by illnesses such as typhoid, cholera, and something known as jail fever, which was typhus. That was caused by the bites from body lice. So it's quite possible that she caught one of those illnesses, and yeah, she passed away down here.
So the woman didn't even make it to trial, the one old woman. grim. Let's watch a bit more. I don't want to watch the whole video because that's not fair to History Hit, but this is so well produced. So much history, so much research here, really well done. Let's watch a little bit more.
One of the women accused of witchcraft has gained more attention than most, perhaps because she was comparatively well off. I've travelled to the village she lived in to learn more about her story.
Wow.
So, Alice, we're in the village of Roughly. This is the statue of probably the most famous of all the Pendle Witches, Alice Nutter.
Oh, Alice Nutter. But of course, she's not part of the Chattox family or the Demdike family. So how does she get involved in this?
She was a very wealthy lady, and she was totally different to the rest of the so-called witches in the fact that she would not need to beg. There's a lot of speculation that she may have known Roger Nowell and had a land dispute with him, and won that land dispute. Nowell thought, I need to get rid of this woman. How? The little girl, Jeanette Devise, who testified in the courts at Lancaster that she'd been at Malkin Tower on Good Friday, 1612.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? That Roger Nowell had a vested interest in Alice's fall.
Very much so. Her story is shrouded in mystery, but certainly in Potts's book he mentions that she made a plea of not guilty, and many people, myself included, believe she was totally innocent of the crimes against her.
Why were there quite so many accused of witchcraft in Lancashire at this time? Well, although no one could have predicted the events of 1612, there are several long-term factors which created a perfect setting for such accusations to flourish.
Let's wind back the clock to the mid-15th century. The development of the printing press in Europe allowed many new ideas to spread fast. One publication which was immensely popular was the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of the Witches. The Malleus was effectively a manual for hunting and persecuting witches.
Pardon? Jeez, all right.
It was first published in 1486,
Wow.
predating James I's demonology by quite some time, and the Malleus went much further than James I's later text. It was created by two Dominican friars, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, and it has been described by the historian Christine Goudier as a deeply misogynistic text. She explains that Kramer, in particular, believed that women were the weaker sex, not just physically, but morally too. He considered them tools of the devil, lustfully attempting to ensnare men, leading them away from their righteous path.
My guy. Tell me you have mommy issues without telling me you have mommy issues. Jesus.
Some believe that it was this book which was largely responsible for the large numbers of deaths during the European witch craze in the 15th, 16th and 17th centuries.
I didn't realize it was that. That was my question earlier, right? Like, how long did this actually span? I didn't realize it was that long.
On the afternoon of Sunday, the 16th of August, two judges arrived, tired and dusty, at Lancaster Castle to preside over the assize court. They were Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley. The trial began. One by one, the accused emerged from the darkness of their prison, filthy, dishevelled and confused. They were brought before a judge and a jury of 12 men chosen from the middle ranks of local society and scrutinised.
First came Anne Whittle, that's old Chattox, an elderly lady who was weak and frail. Anne was accused of the murder of a man, Robert Nutter, to which she pleaded not guilty. The event in question had happened 2 decades previously, and the evidence given was that her family were commonly reputed to be witches, and that milk turned sour at their touch. It was flimsy evidence at best.
Sucks.
But faced with an onslaught of evidence against her, old Chattox broke down. With weeping tears, she humbly acknowledged the evidence to be true.
Don't do this, guys. Don't do it. It's not worth it.
Next came Elizabeth Devise, the daughter of old Demdike, who was charged of 3 counts of murder. Elizabeth was known as Squinting Lizzie because she had one eye set above the other. It was a detail that the clerk of the court,
That is
Thomas
so
Potts, was
mean.
keen to draw attention to, describing it as a preposterous mark of nature. But Elizabeth was about to face a vicious accusation, a witness of her own flesh and blood. It was her 9-year-old daughter, Janet. The moment Elizabeth saw Janet enter the court, she began to scream in such a fearful manner, it was recorded, as all the court did not a little wonder at her, and so amazed the child as with weeping tears she cried out unto my lord the judge, and told him she was not able to speak in the presence of her mother. And so Elizabeth was removed from the dock, and her daughter Janet was placed on a table in full view of the court. And there she told the court how her mother was a witch with a familiar spirit, a brown dog named Bull. And with these powers she had on 3 occasions been guilty of murder.
Tell me you got mommy issues without telling me you got mommy issues. Wow. Getting thrown under the bus by your own kid before they invented buses.
Judge Bromley read out the verdict on Wednesday the 19th of August. He said, "It only remains I pronounce the judgment of the courts against you by the king's authority, which is, you shall go hence to the castle from whence you came, from thence you shall be carried to the place of execution for this county, where your bodies shall be hanged until you be dead, and God have mercy upon your souls."
Grim.
The Pendle Witch Trials resulted in 10 people being sentenced to death.
Wow.
On the basis of evidence that would not be admitted in regular courts. Even in the 17th century, 8 women and 2 men would face a public hanging.
On Thursday, the 20th of August, they were piled into a cart and taken here, what is now Williamson Park,
Beautiful
a hill
building.
just outside the city. We aren't sure exactly where the gallows were, but it would have certainly been in a prominent place, possibly where this Ashton Memorial now stands. A large crowd gathered as the cart was brought to a stop. It was death by strangulation, and their final moments would have been excruciating.
I know people say, oh, video games, movies, they're too violent. Bruh, we're going to the market square to see 10 people get hanged. And you're saying Fortnite is too violent? Sorry, that's not funny. But you know what I mean? This is very grim. We shouldn't make jokes. But also,
Pendle was once a largely inaccessible part of the country, yet today people flock here. They come to see what happened to those famous witches. There are witch-themed shops and witches' brews to be bought.
wow.
But the problem with this is that it puts these events in the realm of magic, of make-believe, of fantasy, whereas actually this is a story, a tragedy of ordinary people, generally women, often at the lowest levels of society.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying earlier about how, like, to me, witches, it's like, ooh, spooky month, Hollywood, hocus pocus, you know what I mean? But actually, these were real people that were killed, like, actually murdered. And while Pendle is, like, kind of a far way away, I've never been, I'd love to go, it looks like a beautiful part of the country. For me in Kent, you have, like, the Faversham plaque that's like, yeah, women were killed right here. Real women with real names. One thing I mentioned earlier, the UK Parliament Act. So in 1542, they passed the Witchcraft Act, which defined witchcraft as a crime punishable by death, repealed 5 years later, but then restored by a new act in 1562. Formal accusations against witches, who were usually poor, elderly women, reached a peak in the late 16th century, particularly in southeast England. Sorry about that. The last trials were held in Leicester. That's how you say that, right? I always get that one wrong. 1717. Overall, some 500 people in England are believed to have been executed for witchcraft. Wild. Big shout out to History Hit for that video. Really well done. The editing, the research, all of the time and effort that went into that. Absolutely incredible. If you would like to watch something else, how about this one? I wanted to learn more about British culture through British authors. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, bye!